If you enjoyed the channel and our video content and would like to support us, you can do this in a couple of ways. You can sign up to our Patreon site, which is a monthly subscription to one of our 4 tiers, each giving you something different from early access interviews up to exclusive unseen footage. There's also the option of a one-off donation via PayPal, which allows you the option to donate an amount of your choice. Both options really help to keep this channel going and to continue putting out regular content for you good folk. So please take a look at aircrewinterview.tv/donate, and I thank you in advance. Thank you and enjoy. Yeah, so let's get
go
on to
into
that.
red flag.
And your time in the US as well.
And the time in the US. Well, I mean, I've done very little time in the US apart from military exercises, although I've had a couple of family holidays since. The first red flag I got involved in, or exercise red flag, sort of came out of the need to be able to train in a realistic environment, and the Americans came up with this sort of post-Vietnam War. It's one of the many things that, just like the Top Gun school, came out and actually started to provide that sort of training for the Americans. And then eventually the Americans, started inviting other nations along, and particularly post Gulf War I, when it was very obvious that actually the Americans had to work with all of the other nations' assets as well. Then quite clearly all those assets need to train together, and that is the whole aim of Red Flag. So Red Flag exercises operate out of Nellis Air Force Base. There are other flag exercises as well, and there's other things like Copper Flag, Green Flag. Green Flag exercises, from memory, I never did one, are to do with electronic warfare. Copper Flag is something else, but so there are specific aims, but the Red Flag exercises basically encompass this, and they use the ranges that are north of Nellis. In fact, they're north of Area 51 as well, which is one of the challenges, not to stray into Area 51 in the middle of one of these big battles. Yeah. So every Red Flag period is normally 2 weeks. So you've got the same crews there for the 2 weeks, and the whole idea is to build up experience. So it's starting from basics, and it's quite often shows what works, what doesn't, with the idea that leaders can package together things where tactics actually work. So I did 2 red flags, should have been 3. The first red flag we went out there, we did Red Air. So we went out there to supplement their aggressor squadron, opposing the Blue Forces, doing all the practice. So for us, it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun with not an awful lot of work put into it, because we're flying sort of 4 ships, 6 ships to supplement the F-16 aggressors that are there permanently at Nellis Air Force Base to provide that role. And you're under their direction, so you're simulating a particular threat, which at the time, back in the 90s, it was very much the former Soviet threat. MiG-21s, MiG-23s, MiG-29s. Obviously not in our case, because we couldn't do the turning, but that's what the F-16s were there for. Red Air is a lot of good fun, and you're out in Nellis, and you're out in Las Vegas, of course. For those who don't know that Nellis is right on the northern corner of Las Vegas, it is. So it's a fabulous place to go to. It's a fabulous place to fly. So that was my first experience of Red Flag and the Nellis experience. We were then supposed to go out in 1998, but as happens with Red Flags, every now and again the Americans decide that they're going to put in their super secret assets. So they will make a particular period of Red Flag a no foreign, which means that if you plan to go out there, then you're a bit stuck because you can't go out to Nellis. But the aeroplanes, so all the UK assets, so there was an E3 that had gone out there from Waddington. There were the F3s that were out there, and there were GR1s that were out there doing the exercise as well. They looked for something else to do. I think the GR1s went elsewhere from us, but what we ended up doing was going down to the very south into Arizona, in fact to Davis Monthan Air Base, and doing an exercise there with the AWACS. Now this was the first period. We just trained with Link 16 JTIDs at the time. We were the second wing to do it because Coningsby had brought the Link 16 into service, and we were supposed to be exercising this at red flag. So it was decided to carry this on, and we ended up operating out of Davis Monthan AFB for a couple of weeks. And initially, we did the local orientation flights, because flying in the States is different terminology, with air traffic control, getting used to all that sort of stuff. And of course, when they have weather out there, it's big weather, as opposed to the weather we tend to get in Europe and the UK. But after a few initial flights where we were doing some stuff, Davis Monthan Air Base, certainly at the time, I think it still is the biggest US Air Force A-10 base that they have.
Yeah.
So, we did some work against A-10s, working in this big training area, military training area that's right down bordering the Mexican airspace. And of course, there were a big warning: don't cross the border. You go, well, what they're going to chase us with? Because I think the Mexican Air Force at the time had Mustangs, something like that.
Yeah.
So they're not going to catch me if we do. But don't stray across the Mexican border. So that's where you are. And we built up the flying. So we ended up with a period of a few days where the main American combined air wing from Mountain Home came down with F-15Cs, F-15Es, and their own tanker and AWACS aircraft. Right. And they came and worked with us for a few days. We did a few days with the US Navy, with some US Navy Hornets that flew across from somewhere in California. And we did some absolutely amazing flying. So much so that a lot of us came back and went, actually, that was better than the last red flag we did.
Oh, really?
And of course, it was better than the red flag that we did because we'd been red air.
Yeah.
So we hadn't got as much out of that training as really we wanted to. When you go to red flag, you want to be blue air, because that's what it's all about. It's all about being part of that composite air package. So Davis Monthan, Arizona was awesome, and it's a great place to go because Tucson, Arizona is a great place. Phoenix is a couple of hours up the road, and if you take a drive for about 2 hours down to the southeast, almost to the Mexican border, there's Tombstone, which of course is the gunfight at the OK Corral, which as a tourist, it's a brilliant place to go because you've got Boot Hill Cemetery and Big Nose Kate's Bar, and it's a tourist place, but it's a genuine town. So if you're fans of westerns, you've got to go to the home of the gunfight at the OK Corral. So anyway, that was that exercise. Great stuff. And then 2 years later, the last red flag I did, which was in early 2000, we went out there as Blue Air.
And how did that differ compared to your first time then?
Massive. And of course, the combined air operations with the Americans, we were already doing anyway. In 2000, it was the year after we'd started operating in Saudi Arabia on Op Southern Watch. And actually the whole thing, getting the whole package airborne into the starting area before you start the exercise, was just like we were doing out of Prince Sultan Air Base. The tankers launch, and then the fighters launch, and you all go and refuel before you start the VUL period, and then you go in and you do the exercise. And we were using this specifically. We had a couple of guys who were working up to be mission commanders, and these these guys were leading fairly large groups of fighters in all of this. And I remember the very final exercise. I'm not going to go into the tactical details because it would take too long. But as anybody, as any mud mover will know, it's a lot easier to attack a target if you can separate all the bombers out, and you've got to do that to avoid people being taken out by the frag from air-to-ground weapons being dropped. As an air-to-air person, every air-to-air person knows that a long strung-out line of ground attack aircraft is the most impossible thing to defend, because what you need to do, if you think about it, if you go out in town and you want to blunder through a bunch of people and you want to protect an individual, what you do is you get them in a small group, you surround them, and you go through as fast as you can, and you get them out the other side. And air-to-air tactics, in a similar environment is exactly what you want to do. And the leader of this particular exercise, he decided that rather than having all his assets stringing out over a number of minutes, that everybody would cross the start line exactly at the same time in a big wall.
Right.
And I just remember it. I remember sitting there. It was a beautiful day, as it mostly is in that part of the world. There wasn't a cloud in the sky, and it was so clear. And they had 12 F-15Cs sitting up in the contrails.
Wow.
On purpose.
Right.
Sitting up in the contrails above us. And then we had F-16 CJs underneath there. We had other F-16s in. I think we had 8 aircraft in the formation, all in a big wall across the thing. And then we just had all the bombing assets. And the idea was that if anybody was targeted, they just went defensive. But with just all of these assets, the Red Air couldn't chase the people they were targeting.
Yeah.
And success is shown by the fact that within 2 minutes, I think we'd killed all Red Air.
Wow, 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
Crikey.
And of course, the way that Red Air worked, it depended on how they did it. But Red Air used to have to go to like a sin bin for a few minutes.
Oh, yeah.
And then they could regenerate.
Like a game, yeah.
Yeah, so big because obviously you're trying to get the training.
Yeah.
But because we killed out all Red Air in about 2 minutes, they all had to go to the sin bin, and by the time they were regenerating, all the bombers had got in and got out of the target. And I always remember I just remember this view, just sitting there with the guy in my back seat who was on his check, and we're just looking at all of these assets around us, and going, this is amazing. I wish you could get a photo of this, but a photo wouldn't have done it justice. And when MiG-1, who's the leader of the aggressors, stood up to debrief, of course he's got no idea what your tactics are. So they've just got to fly their tactics and deal with what they see. And of course he said, well, we could see all this mess on our radar, but we couldn't work it out at all.
Right.
And he said, and it was very, very intimidating seeing those contrails coming towards us.
Okay. I mean,
so that bit was on purpose.
Yes.
Because you never sit, tactically, you never sit in contrails unless it's going to be of benefit to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So red flag. I mean, we came back from that, and everybody was buzzing because it was a tactic that worked. It's brilliant. But then you then go back out and operate somewhere like Saudi Arabia, and you launch it. Planning these things and launching these packages exactly as you do in red flag. And of course, going back to what I said about the whole aim of red flag, that's the point.
Yeah, exactly.
It's training how you want to fight.
So it works.
So it works, and it's a really great asset. I'm sure over the last 23 years, red flag has developed massively, and of course there are new weapon systems. Typhoon's out there now with AMRAAM. I don't know whether F3. I'm sure F3 must have gone out there with AMRAAM at some stage, which would have been very different to my experience. And I can't talk about that. I can only talk about what I saw. But yeah, really, really beneficial training for everybody.
So I want to talk about the F3 at red flag.
Yeah.
How did the other nations view it? Did they think it was like an essential threat as such, or was it? It's not going to do very well.
I think people are quite often polite. I always used to taxi out in PSAB especially, going out on missions and sit next to the F-15s on the arming points, and I was always envious. I always wanted to go and fly F-15. To me, back in the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s, the F-15C, was the quintessential air superiority aeroplane.
Yes.
It really was, and I would be very surprised to find anybody who would deny that. It really did the job absolutely fantastically. Amazing airframe, and the view out of it was just, you used to see these guys sitting up there, with the cockpit sides down here, with this fantastic view. So how were we viewed? A lot of the Americans didn't really know the airplane and understand it. Tornado to them was a ground attack aircraft.
Right.
So you'd come along. If they'd worked with you, they knew what your capability was. they knew that we were really well trained. They knew that we worked our backsides off to get the best out of the aeroplane, but at the end of the day, it was still, an F3. If you could execute your tactics really well and you were smart, you could get success. But it would have been nice to have had that F-15.
Yeah.
It would have been nice to have had that F-15 and to be able to do the job like they did.
So how did the F3 fare against, like when you were going, it was blue, I'm guessing it was F-16s, F-15s as red air. Did you have any good success there?
Yes, you did. You've got to bear in mind, the aim of the aggressor squadrons is not to be an F-16.
It's like MiG-29,
It's to be whatever the threat is that they're simulating. So, it might be MiG-29, it might be Su-27, it might be MiG-21. The threat is whatever they brief the threat that they're going to fly that particular day. So going back to when we flew Red Air, they would brief us specifically, right, this is what we need you to do. We don't want you doing this particular tactic. We want you to operate in this way. So it's a very canned thing. I mean, I talk to friends who have done the aggressor role in both the US Navy and the US Air Force, and it is a really, really specifically trained role. They go out and get special training to actually do that. Fly that particular role as Red Air. Whereas in the UK on squadrons, yes, you might go off and do a 2v2 and two of you simulated, MiG-23, something like that. But it's not your speciality. For them, being Red Air is a speciality. So yeah, flying against them, flying specific tactics and flying former Soviet type tactics. Yes, you could be quite successful against them. But of course, if they got in to shoot you unsighted, you got shot unsighted.
Yeah.
But in the same way, you could get in amongst them and shoot them unsighted. If you can't see the person you're trying to fight, you're probably going to lose.
Of course, yeah.
And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what aeroplane you're in.
Yeah.
And that is a really, really important thing.
Yeah.
To understand in that role. If you can, and that was what, within the F3, we used to try and execute. We used to try and execute tactics that when, at a certain point, we needed to be sneaky. Because we couldn't get in there and turn and burn with them, we had to be sneaky.
Yeah.
So we would try all sorts of devious tactics to try and get unseen into a visual arena.
Yeah.
And if you did, that was great.
Absolutely.
The biggest difficulty in the red flag environment is actually being able to identify who's who.
Right.
Because you all start off, Blue Air would start off to the east side, and I can't remember the name of the pass or the line that you pass, and Red Air start here. So when you've got all Blue Air here and you're heading towards Red Air that are over there, anything on your radar is the enemy. Once you've hit that first merge and first airplanes have merged, it is really, really difficult to to be able to identify who's who. So you're almost going, or you are going quite often from a beyond visual range scenario to now you've actually got to visually ID people. And that applies just as equally to Hank in his F-15 than it does to us in our F3. You've got to get in there and visually identify them, which has risk as well.
Of course.
But of course, it's bringing everybody together. And in fact, that very last trip, we did get a kill against somebody. I think it was a regenerated aircraft in the midst of one of these merges, where we recognised this guy coming in. My backseater had him radar contact, locked him up, and we're trying to get a declaration from the AWACS on him. And the controller on the AWACS was actually a really good mate of mine. And in the end, because we're heading towards this bloke and he's about 8 miles away, and I'm just thinking, we're going to die if we're not careful here. And in the end, I hit the transmit switch and I called out the controller's name to get his attention.
Right.
And it was Matt, Grinner, declare. And I called the position on the bloke.
Wow.
And he just came back and he went hostile. Poof! And I took the shot. And we killed this guy out. So I think it was one of the only regenerating red air that was coming back in, chasing everybody out of the area.
Wow.
And we got this guy. But, if I hadn't have got that declaration, I would have been at the merge with him.
Yeah.
I'd probably be in trouble.
Yeah, of course.
Or would have just had to, blow through, hoping that he wasn't going to turn with us.
Yeah.
So, there's risk in everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the game when you're coming into visual tactics.
Absolutely.
I mean, really hard work, great fun.
Yeah.
I just absolutely love it. Absolutely love it.
I can imagine. But you probably have many memorable stories from Red Flag, if you can share maybe a couple with our viewers. But there's one story I've heard a couple of times, and it amazes me. It was with the B1B guys, and they were like, "Oh, we need an escort," and they were asking the F3 guys,
Okay.
they were like, "Can you keep up with us?" And we're like, "Yeah." Because he didn't expect it. Have you got any great stories like that for us, Grinner?
I didn't have any experience of B1. The B1 never took part in either of the two flags that I did. Though that is most likely a very, very credible story, because yes, that was one of the advantages that we had over the F-15, in that we could go faster than them at low level, and the F-16. Because you've got a lot of drag on those aircraft at that height, whereas of course actually the F3 was a good pointy aeroplane at low level, and it could go very, very fast at low level. So yeah, you would be able to keep up with the B1. I suppose I think it was the one where we were doing Red Air, where they had B-52s in, and I remember being vectored across to low level inbound, and we're heading down behind this mountain peak. There's a range of mountain peaks in the middle of the range. Can't remember what they're called. As we're heading towards this B-52 came around the corner at 250 feet, going, "That's big." That's a big aeroplane. I think we shot it anyway, but it does make you wonder how many missiles you would actually have to fire.
Yeah.
At a B-52 to down it, would one AIM-9 work?
Yeah, it's a big thing,
with a proximity fuse and a bit of a blast frag warhead, or would it just cause a little bit of shrapnel damage to it? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is to that. So that's one particular story I remember off there. The one I just told you about, the merge, or the last mission. And this tactic, which actually the leader called rage on, rage off, because those are his action points.
Yeah.
And he had one line which was rage on, one action line which was rage off. There was a lot of things in there, tied in with that. But I do remember that specifically, and that particular engagement. But other stuff tied in with Red Flag. It's all a bit of a blur actually, because the missions were so very, very busy, and we were usually blessed with pretty good weather on them. I know, looking through my logbook, in one of them had a couple of exercise aborts due to weather. So I'm guessing that was probably the first one I did when we were doing Red Air. But yeah, and because I remember piecing back into Nellis in some fairly poor weather, trying to get identified on the radar, because of course the air traffic controllers have then got upwards of 100 aeroplanes to get back,
a nightmare for
which when the weather's poor, and fighters generally aren't blessed with masses of fuel, so by the time you're coming back from a trip, you probably don't have a lot of excessive fuel. So certainly not what I'm used to having in my airliner nowadays. So
absolutely, yeah. So to wrap up, what was a social life like over that? That must have been pretty incredible.
It was. But the one thing I would say is the Air Force would never put you up in a casino, because they weren't allowed to.
I've heard stories about F3 guys there and there.
Well, it's not necessarily. And the Air Force wouldn't put anybody up in casinos, which is a shame, because of course the vast majority of hotels are casinos. So you tended to be in sort of poorer hotels or motels in sort of dodgy parts of the town. But having said that, yeah, the social life was really good. You had to you had to look after yourself. So the social life tended to be obviously nothing to do when you're flying. So if you weren't flying the next day, yep, you could go into town. But to be quite honest, on a red flag exercise, you have two waves. So it's either a night red flag where they'll have maybe an afternoon wave and a night wave, or they'll have 2 day waves.
Right.
So you're either flying on one wave or the other. And the way that we used to do it was you'd maybe do the morning wave 1 week, and then you'd switch around and you'd do the afternoon wave the following week. Because the planning cycle, obviously, you're not just walking in and getting into an airplane and going flying. You've got to do all the planning and then the briefing, and it's a very, very long process. So you're looking at an overall, somebody is allocated the mission lead, and then they get all the formation leaders together and they talk about how they're going to do it. And then you go away and you make your own plan and draw your own maps and so on, certainly for the ground attack guys. And we just go away and drink coffee and just have a general map, obviously, as air-to-air guys.
Yep.
But we needed to know where they were going, roughly, so we could protect them. And then you get back for a mass brief, and then you go and have your formation brief. Then you go fly. So you're looking at a really, really big lead-in time.
Yeah.
So if you're on the morning wave, then you were planning the previous afternoon. And then you were doing the briefing in the morning, because you've got to do the briefing on the day, but you could be in at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, flying at 9:30, 10 in the morning. I can't remember what the timeline was exactly. You'd be airborne for maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours. So the whole mission thing, from getting everybody airborne to get everybody back, would maybe be about 2.5 hours. Then you've got to debrief. So of course you go and have your quick debrief as a unit, and then you maybe get together with all the air-to-air people and you have an air-to-air debrief, and then you go to the big mission debrief. So it ain't over when you've landed. You've still got to do that bit as well. So you can see that if you're on the morning wave, by the time you've finished debriefing, it's now mid-afternoon, and then you go into planning for tomorrow. The people who are on the afternoon wave probably will do the big stuff. They'll come in the morning anyway, but a little bit later than the morning wave do, and they'll do the main mission planning and then the briefing and roll in, because they'll be finished their debrief in the evenings. So there's socially during that, you're just busy. So you get to the weekend and then you're shattered, but it's party time. And you've got 2 evenings, 2 days to party before you're back into the routine again for the rest of it. So, and then of course there's the end of the exercise where you're now coming home. So then it's party time. Yeah. So the party time tends to happen on weekends. Everything's too serious to. I mean, obviously you've got to go out and eat, and you do tend to go out and eat. But it's generally across, go to somewhere that you can get
Taco
some
Bell
decent,
across the road.
Whatever you like, Taco Bell. The last one I did was opposite Hard Rock Cafe.
Perfect.
So that was a regular haunt for breakfast.
Yeah.
So, and of course the big thing on one of these is ordering without questions. If anybody who's been to the States will know exactly what I'm talking about. And in fact, you see it on any movie. When you go in and order something, you've got to get the order in where the waitress doesn't ask you a single question. So, I want this with this and a side order of this. I want the toast done like this. I want butter. I want da-da-da-da. And I don't want it. And I want particular dressing on my salad. And if she can go away without asking you any questions about anything else, and that is a great competition, because it is really, really difficult to do in the States.
With that as well? Yeah.
Yep. So.
Yeah, brilliant stuff. So one last question.
Yeah.
So when you were in that kind of social environment, and let's say you went to Vegas, could you say, were you allowed to say you're an RAF pilot, or did you have to keep that stum? Or can you not say?
But you didn't go out and advertise it.
No, but someone said, "What are you doing? What's a Brit doing here?" Like, what did you say? What?
For a bit of fun, you made up a few things.
I think we'll end it there. But so how long did you spend over there, like, went on a red flag exercise?
Well, the red flag was usually 2 weeks, so you'd travel, and obviously you'd start off on the flying was Monday to Friday, so you would almost certainly arrive a few days earlier, so it would be towards the end of the previous week, from what I remember, and then obviously you had to go in and take over all the equipment from the previous unit. Right. If you were the first unit there, you'd be taking out the aeroplanes as well, so that would be a lot longer. And if you were the last unit, you'd bring them back. I only ever did that once, and that was the Arizona exercises, Blazing Saddles in 1998, where we brought the aeroplanes home. And actually that was great fun, because we tanked the aeroplanes. The idea was we tanked them from Davis Monthan all the way to the east coast of the States. We went to Dover Air Base, Delaware, which is C5 base. And then the idea was that we would then do the transatlantic bit. So you come across the Atlantic, which for an airliner, of course, is nothing. For a little aeroplane with 2 people sitting on ejection seats, with the potential to end up in the water, is a much bigger thing. And so the idea was we were going to do Dover, Delaware, and then we were going to go across the Atlantic to Larges in the Azores, and then come home from Larges. And actually what happened, we had a couple of aeroplanes that had defects that needed fixing. And so I was nominated, one of the 3 crews, to stay behind. And back in those days, all the transatlantic crossings, obviously it would be tanking, but we used to have a Nimrod that used to do search and rescue cover. So I think the plan was originally that it would be 3 waves of aircraft going across, because I think we were taking 12 aeroplanes back, so it would be 3 waves of 4 aircraft, each with a tanker, and the Nimrod would get airborne ahead of the first wave, and they would sort of loiter mid-Atlantic and wait for the last people to go past, and then they'd follow them into Larges. Well, the problem that we had was that aeroplanes broken, we couldn't go, so they left 1 wave behind. But they needed the tankers. They needed to take the tankers across with the first 2 waves. So we were going to be stuck for a few days. And I remember waving off 8 aeroplanes. In fact, I think we waved off 9 aeroplanes, and there were three left behind. And the guy, the RAF guy, liaison guy from the US Embassy in Washington, came across, waved these car keys in front of us, and went, we've booked you a hotel in Washington, DC. Didn't think you'd want to hang around in Dover, Delaware, and it's not a place to hang around in.
Yeah.
And so I think we had a couple of days in Washington, nice. courtesy of the embassy, before the Nimrod could come back with a tanker to take us across to Larges.
Not bad, is it?
which was quite a good deal. So yeah, there were 3 aircraft, 6 of us. So we had 2 cars. We ended up in Washington for a couple of days, and we had a really nice time. And to answer the question on that particular one, because I can remember this one, do you say you're RAF pilots? No, we were dual sellers. Because just as we left Tucson, there was a big dual convention going on.
As in like rubies and
as in sellers, jewel sellers coming in from all over the place.
Right.
Jewels, diamonds, and all that sort of stuff. So we decided that was going to be our cover story when we got to Washington, And if anybody checked, we just come from Tucson. Yeah. We're on our way back to the UK. If anybody checked, they could go, well, it's true, there's a dual conference going on. So yeah, that was the thing. And then we took the airplanes across to Larges, had a night in Larges, which was one of the finest meals I've ever had in a hotel as well. And then back to the UK. So I think by the time we got back to the UK, it was sort of well through week 4 at this stage. So I've been away for quite a while. But yeah, so I mean, you'd normally be away, for maybe 3 weeks on an exercise like that, if you're taking the travelling time on either end.
Brilliant stuff. Well, Grinner, thanks very much for coming back on the show.
My pleasure.